There is a lot of walking in New Zealand. Sometimes I like to walk in the forest. I usually get to a certain point and turn back, but today I decided to walk the rest of the way. This unique trail leads from the visitor center at the top of the hill, and then down the hill to a large abandoned railroad bed that was once blazing with grubs and is now a rusty ruin. I decided to take the trail, but it was already 4:30 and getting dark, so I decided to explore the surrounding area a bit and headed back to the car. About 200 meters from the main station is an old railroad tunnel. We left this cave for 3 years. So I entered the cave with a small flashlight. The length of this cave is not more than 500 meters. As I walked, I could have sworn I heard someone walking and breathing behind me, despite the sound of my wet feet. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I stopped and started a fire with my hands. But nothing. A small ball of light from the opening of the cave. Then I start walking again, and the sensation returns. Then through my own breathing and footsteps, I heard something. No. Someone. "Go away," a man said in a deep voice, and I heard a terrible whisper. And it didn't need to be said twice. I felt my large body run through a small tunnel meant for a small train, and I heard footsteps behind me. The light at the entrance to the cave grows brighter. I can feel the safety of the sunlight washing over me. Turn away. I broke free and fell on my stomach, still in the cave. I tried to get up because I felt someone beside me, but my shoulders were killing me and my legs didn't want to work anymore. Either way, he didn't want me there, and he didn't want anyone else there. I was covered in mud from head to toe. But in the safety of daylight, walking along the railroad tracks, I looked like a horror movie character from The Walking Dead. I entered a small station and was able to get on a station that had been out of service for a long time. I sat down and tried to stretch out my arm so it wouldn't hurt. Then I stretched out my legs, stood up, and to my left, a man in a brown and white shirt, dirty and discolored, stood on the platform as if waiting for a train. I looked at my feet, turned to look at the man, and to my surprise, he wasn't there. Honestly, I'm a big guy, and I've never run faster in my life. They went up the hill through the entrance and back to the safety of the campground. So, I'm sitting in the car, trying to figure out what's going on. If anyone is interested, yes, since access here is not blocked, I can take pictures of the place, but I'll only come back if I'm asked. A few years ago, my friend Jane and I took a trip to Portland, Oregon. We're both from the south side of Chicago, and Jane was very impressed with the city. He made sure everything was better on the West Coast, including the people. So we flew into Portland, rented a car, and named her Veronica. Before flying home, we picked up Veronica and drove to Aberdeen, WA, to see the house where Kurt Cobain spent his childhood. Then we headed to the beach and did some sightseeing along the way. We drove to Astoria, Oregon, to see the house from the movie Goonies and ended the day at Cannon Beach Grass Rock. All in all, it was a fun day. After dark, we decided to head back to the hotel in less than 2 hours. I knew I needed gas, so I told Jane to stop at the first gas station I could find, a small resort town with little stores and restaurants, but I didn't see any gas stations. Being a city dweller, I saw them everywhere, so I wasn't particularly worried. I'll see it soon enough. Not familiar with the area at all while talking to Jane, keeping directions on the GPS. Next thing we know, we are not in any town, but on a bumpy road surrounded by trees. At this point, I was a little worried, so I pulled over to the side of the road to use the GPS and find the road, the nearest gas station. He told me it was about a mile further down the road. Okay, I put it on, and I'm all set. So I'm on my way, and Veronica informs us that we will get to where we need to be. We were surrounded by woods and darkness. As far as I know, there is nothing for miles around. According to Veronica, we have 10 miles of gas left, and the nearest gas station is 30 miles away. I mind my own business and don't worry about the other car. I figure they need gas, and out of the corner of my eye, I see someone pointing. After some hesitation, I open the window to see what they want. A middle-aged man and his wife are sitting in the car. He asks us all sorts of questions. Do you need to refuel? Are you coming from the beach? "Are you heading back to Portland?" I answer politely but briefly. He then explains that he has a gas station where we are, but he doesn't make enough money to stay out late. He tells us that he knows Chevron, located 3 miles away, and will show us the way. He gave us his number and told us to call him if we didn't make it. He says, "My name is Sam, the mechanic. If you don't make it in time, let me know and I'll come and rescue the women." Jane talks about how great he is in Chicago and that it never happened. I agreed. Matt was extraordinarily handsome. It was odd that he was driving past the gas station at the same time as us, but it didn't matter. I joked that he would call his partner at the gas station and say, "I'm sending 2 women to you." We pull up there, and this guy, about 18 or 19 years old, comes out to get gas. He asks how we're doing, and then he says, "Yeah, there's a lot of strange people here today." Jane and I look at each other, and I chew a little and say, "I told you so." But I turn to the guy again and ask him what he means. He tells me a story about how his brother owes a lot of money to some junkies and is hiding out somewhere nearby. After his shift is over, he plans to beat the shit out of her. I can see that Jane is getting worried about this oddity of the night, so I give the guy some good advice, wish him luck, and get back behind the wheel. During the conversation, Jane calls Sam a mechanic and leaves him a voicemail. He tells her he made it to the gas station and appreciates his help. I figured it wasn't necessary to call. That's what it was. But a few minutes later, as we were driving down the highway and about 10 minutes from the hotel, Jane's phone rang and it was Sam. He thanked her even more. He asks her where we are going and when we are flying home. He tells her his name is Sam Glasty and that he has written a book called False Accused. He told us to read it on the flight. That, of course, piqued my interest. "Hey Jane, you need to find this book to find out what it is." He Googles it, then freezes and looks sick. "What is it?" I don't want to scare you, though. He's accused of Green River's murder, and he immediately gets worried, because now he has a number. Back at the hotel, we keep digging, and Green River identifies the serial killer's victim, Sam, at an ID check. However, real serial killers are caught and convicted by DNA results. But at the same time, in the 70s, Sam was convicted and served time for kidnapping and beating a young woman in the same neighborhood we were in. He wrote a book about it all. We were stuck in Portland for 2 more days because of a snowstorm in Chicago. It was a strange and stressful couple days. Given the circumstances and the strangeness of this night, things could probably go very badly. And I'm glad that all I took away from that night was a story. It happened about 2 years ago when I was studying biology at university. I signed up for a trip to collect samples for an experiment to be conducted by environmental science students. This required collecting samples from several locations, so they enlisted biology, environmental science, and forestry students to help collect samples in a short period of time. The area my team was going to explore was a few hours away from my university in the Pacific Northwest. There were 9 people in my group, 8 students, and a controlling professor. We got to the campground in the evening and set up our tents. One of the students brought a large can of pea soup from home and shared it with the rest of the trip. I don't like pea soup, so I declined the offer. Everyone ate except me, one of the students, and the professor. The next morning, the 5 students who ate breakfast were not feeling well. They had terrible food poisoning and couldn't walk for 8 or 9 hours to collect the samples we needed. The professor who led us first laid down a few rules. People had to walk in groups of at least 2. We had to get back to camp before dark. But now those rules have been lifted so we can stick to the schedule and collect all the samples we need. But we are told to make every effort to complete the task at hand if you do it safely. That morning I set out on a long journey. After about a mile, I came across a creek that I had to follow. I had to walk 4 miles upstream, stopping a quarter mile to collect water and soil samples. So I was in a hurry to get back before dark. However, halfway through the hike, I realized that was not going to happen. After about 2 miles, I stopped for lunch, sitting on a log overlooking the creek. The scene was very peaceful until I heard the smell of tobacco. It wasn't the smell of smoked tobacco, but the smell of a smoking machine where tobacco is fermented for weeks. I looked around but didn't see anyone. I thought the wind had brought some kind of hunter's or hiker's odor, but after a few minutes, the odor was not gone. The vegetation in the area wasn't as thick, but there were plenty of places to hide behind a tree or bush. Admittedly, since someone was apparently so close to me, it took me so long to smell them. I quickly picked up my afternoon trash and continued down the river. The cigarette odor disappeared after a few hours. It wasn't until I got to the last sampling site, after dark, that I remembered the smell again. By this time, it had gotten quite dark in the forest. In retrospect, it was a very stupid idea to procrastinate, as it would have been dangerous to return to camp in the dark, even without a smoking stalker. Putting the vials in my bag, I pointed my flashlight at the dark forest, searching out who was giving off the odor. I didn't see anything that caught my attention, or rather, I saw too many things in the dark light to make out what was coming out of the tree behind my head or what was hiding in the leaf. I didn't like the thought of a stranger lurking next to me in the dark woods and not revealing himself, so I started streaming at double speed. On the way back, even though it was dark, I went faster because I didn't have to stop to take a sample. Even so, I made it back to camp just before 10. I was the last one back, and everyone was asleep except the professor. I didn't tell the professor about the cigarette smell because he looked tired and went to his bed in the van shortly after my return. Soon I went to my tent, but at some point I woke up and wanted to go to the bathroom. I decided to go into the woods to do my business because I knew that some students were still not feeling well, and going to the bathroom in the van was not enough. I walked about 100 feet into the woods, found a tree, and did what I had to do. As I walked back to camp, something caught my eye. Somewhere in the distance, a small red glow appeared in the woods. I couldn't figure out what it was, and realized it was the cherry from a cigarette. I stood for a moment and watched as the red ember lit up, darkened, and then moved closer to the ground as the smoker took the cigarette out of his mouth. Not seeing the man, I thought he was looking at the camp. They didn't recognize me. They saw me walking off into the woods because the fire was out and the moon was half full, so there wasn't much light. I walked back to camp slowly, as quietly as possible, and got into the wagon to wake the professor. I told him about the man smoking in the woods and the smell of cigarettes that day. However, as soon as we got off the wagon, the cigarette went out. My professor woke up another student who did not have food poisoning, and we took turns looking around the camp. I didn't see or feel anything else while I was on guard, and fell asleep when the professor woke up and it was his turn. In the morning, the professor, another student, and I went to see who we assumed was the smoker, and indeed found about 10 cigarettes on the ground near a tree. And the tree itself looked like someone had turned around and stabbed it with a knife. The bark and outer layers of the tree are damaged and broken. The professor decided that the group should return the same day just in case, even if we didn't collect all the samples we were supposed to. We packed up camp and headed down the narrow dirt trail. But as we pulled onto the paved trail, a van with boards pulled out of a roadside clearing and started following us. This van followed us, turned off the highway when we got off, and went down the same street as us, and stopped behind us as soon as we turned onto the road leading to the university campus. Everyone was dreading it, but it was 9 p.m., a weekend, so campus security was locked down. We decided to empty the van and stop for the night since the van wouldn't take us to campus. I offered to help the professor catalog and salvage sample collection tubes from our trip, so it was a few more hours until we left the biological sciences building and headed to my dorm. I started to walk out into the cold night air. The professor had just gone to the other side of the building to get in his car and drive home. As I walked a few dozen meters away from the now locked building, the smell of old cigarettes hit me again. I looked back and saw the smell of smoke about 25 yards away in the darkness, in the direction of the pedestrians. I was scared at that moment, but I hoped it was just a student or one of the teachers who was late and had a smoke. But I couldn't be completely sure because the smell of tobacco smelled like it had been in the woods the night before. I followed the road and soon met a man smoking. After about 100 yards, I looked over my shoulder and saw a tobacco cherry glimmering in the darkness. The smoker followed me. It scared me even more, but I held back until I rounded a small group of trees and saw a white van parked lonely in the parking lot. I ran toward the dorm. As I ran, I looked over my shoulder and saw a cigarette fall to the ground and a dark figure appear behind me. I didn't look back, but I heard someone running across the grass towards the pedestrians. I reached the entrance to the dormitory and held up my keycard in front of the reader that controlled the door locks. When I heard a quiet sound, I opened the door, slipped under the door, and quickly knocked on the door. When I stopped and looked through the glass door, I saw the dark road stop in front of the lighted road. I watched for a minute or two, and then saw a lighter spark. The light barely illuminated his scruffy beard and the brim of his baseball cap before it faded and was replaced by a smoky red glow. I turned and headed up the stairs to the living room. When I got to the window overlooking the same courtyard I just walked past, there was no black figure or trace of cigarettes. I work in the service, beauty, and body industry. A few years ago, we had a very weird and wonderful client who came in for a few treatments that I and 3 other girls went to several times a week. He showed up to the appointment very late, brought strange books about dreams, and was stripped naked and covered with a towel, but the treatment did not require nuking him. We all agreed that he was a complete weirdo, and within a few weeks we were free from his mad clutches. Winter passed. Out of the blue he called and said he wanted to be treated again. I asked my supervisor not to include this, but we had no reason not to. Besides, he's only in his early 20s, and he's a rich guy who will spend all of his mother's money. When he was on the phone with me, he remembered everything about me and started apologizing for being mean to me in the past. He wasn't. He loves me so much. Blah, blah, blah. My coworker was with me for the first few treatments, but after a few weeks he was no longer able to work, and I was left alone. He kept trying to keep me in the room, first asking questions about the treatments and then trying to invade my privacy. He was constantly complimenting my body and looks. I would respond rudely to him and he would apologize. There were a few times when he was high and said the strangest things, not in the weeds. It sounds like a good story at all, but if you could imagine how a serial killer would act in movies and television, it would be. I'm not even kidding. He was the scariest person I had ever seen in my life. The day I finally regained my strength, he put on a suit and praised me repeatedly during the procedure, and then started asking me what I thought about raping and killing women, how women are horrible, etc. Similar. It bothered me more and more that he was laughing or trying not to laugh when he talked about rape and murder. I don't remember what he said because I was so scared I forgot everything. After this procedure was completed, I immediately called him a cab. Normally, he would ask me to do this, but I did it much sooner than he asked. Before he left, he said, "It's amazing to me that you are so vulnerable." He looked at me with the coldest look and a slight smile. I almost cried in front of him. I could feel my heart pounding and was sweating profusely. Before he left, he said he forgot something in the room and was waiting for me to fetch it. If I had entered the room, he could have easily followed me and closed the door. In the winter, after 8 p.m., it's easy to catch me. The streets freeze over at that time, and the remaining residents of these houses always leave about 5 or 6 people. He just stood there looking at me, and I sat at the table, holding the scissors straight out, which he couldn't see, and waited for him to pick up the forgotten thing. She took the thing and then asked me to help clean up, to which I naturally refused and closed the door, leaving. I watched her get into a cab and then ran to my car, crying as hard as I never had in my adult life. He called a few days ago and tried to explain to my coworker that he wanted to apologize and threatened me. I never spoke to him or told my boss what happened, and he told me not to come back. I don't know if he was actually trying to do something, but I think he realized someone had to be outside without calling a cab beforehand. Who knows? Maybe that's what was holding him back. My family owns land in the remote mountains near Eureka. I come here a few times a year and haven't noticed anything unusual. But last night was unusual. I didn't know it before, but this place is very popular with UFO sightings. I don't know if that's true or not, but I'm having a hard time coming up with a logical explanation. So, we slept for a good few hours, and when everyone was asleep, it was just me, my dad, and my husband. We enjoyed the weather and a cozy campfire. At 1 a.m., we started talking about the stars and leaned back in our chairs and just looked up at the sky. My husband pointed out a brighter light than any other star. What's more, it was moving steadily. I immediately thought it must be a satellite, but then my father intervened. "Oh no, I don't think so." My dad and I love aliens, and we've seen them both many times before. I focused on the light and noticed that it didn't just move in a straight line. It turned backwards as if it was heading east. All three of us suddenly turned around and turned toward the mountains to the south, wondering how strange this was. I thought to myself, is this really now? The light had stopped. At least 5 minutes of walking on a mountain. Then we all say it's not a satellite, as they explain from time to time. Man, this is wild. The light started shifting to the right again until it disappeared behind the trees, and we completely forgot about it. We sat around the fire for a few minutes as usual, and my husband got up to get a drink. And when he got up, almost the whole sky shone with a bright white light, like lightning on steroids. It was a clear night. No storms were visible on radar within a few miles. We couldn't see a single cloud. It couldn't have been more obvious. Only my father and I saw it because most people were asleep and the groom was inside. When it happened, there was no sound, no noise, no noise, no noise, nothing else. But then the whole mountain went silent for a few minutes. It happened very funny. Time seemed to stop for a moment. My father also began to feel uneasy and anxious, and finally went to bed. After that, we were both awake for a while, but we didn't see any strange lights or flames. But there was definitely a strong sense of unease surrounding me all night. My boyfriend and I have been together for 9 years now. I'm always plagued by nightmares, but you don't talk about it on the first day. This happened when my boyfriend and I had been dating for a few months and recently started sleeping together. We slept over at his house. I woke up in the middle of the night and saw us holding hands. I thought she was cute, but I noticed that her hand was very pale and thin. My boyfriend's hands really do look like an orc's. My eyes got used to the darkness, and I saw her hands cupped on her stomach and grabbed the third pink hand. When I realized this, a woman who looked like a woman with long dark hair came out from behind my boyfriend, stood up, looked at me, and lay down. I tapped my finger on my hand like I was holding someone's hand. I don't know why I did that. I added it to the dream logic. Our relationship was just beginning, so I didn't tell him because I didn't want him to think I was crazy. Years have passed and now we live together. He is well aware of my unusual beliefs and nightmares. All of a sudden, out of the blue, I remembered the dream. I told him, "Hey, did I ever tell you about the nightmares that happened in our house when we moved in together? While we were sleeping, I saw someone who looked like Sadako in your bed. I almost got sick." I made a joke, but he didn't laugh. She turned very pale and said, "Wait, he tried to take your hand?" Her reaction surprised me, and I remember holding her hand and even showing her a thumbs up. Then my boyfriend told me that as a child, he had a recurring dream in which a woman with long black hair and white hands tried to hold his hand, but he woke up in fear before he could reach her. He never told me about it because he kept it all in his childhood dreams. He never told me about it because he wrote it off as a childhood dream. But now neither of us think it's a nightmare. When I was in college 20 years ago, my friends and I would often take weekend trips to the mountains of North Georgia. If you wanted to smoke, drink, and commune with nature, those mountains were the perfect place. This terrible thing happened one weekend when my friend Bill and his German Shepherd Monty went to Sky Valley. It was the beginning of the fall semester at the University of Southern California, and there wasn't much more to come. We found a place where the dirt road went back a half-mile, then another mile, and camped by the river. There were great trails with interesting spots nearby, not to mention a perfect level area to set up camp. Bill and I arrived at the site around 4 p.m. and lit the fire. We were musicians, Bill was the guitarist, and I was the percussionist, so we started playing with the fire. Around 10, after playing for a while, we talked about life and girls and then went to bed. It was a clear night, and we slept under the stars alone. Needless to say, there was no sign of other people in the area during our other trips. Around 2 a.m., I was awakened by Monty's howl. It was a deep, guttural scream. Bill was still dead to the world, and I sat and watched and listened, thinking that perhaps some animal had entered our camp. There were only embers left of the campfire, so it was hard to see, but I heard a distant rumbling. Notice where the sounds were coming from. I saw a faint red flash, then another faint red flash to the left of the first. It was about 100 meters away from me. My mind connected everything I saw together. The cigarette lights were on and they were getting closer. Bill. I whispered, "Wake up." Bill woke up and I explained to him what had happened. At this point, Monty started barking as the strangers approached the camp. By the time we got up, they were already in camp, completely oblivious to the 70-pound German Shepherd. 2 handsome men in their 30s and 40s approached us. Bill told Monty to calm down. I'll never forget what these guys were like. Damn skinny, 5 feet tall, dirty shirts, scruffy beards, and probably 5 teeth. Each of them had large knives attached to their belt buckles. "What are you guys doing here? Looks like you're having a great time." We said we'd go to the campground and have a beer. They asked if we had any weed and we gave them some. They looked around a little bit and asked if we wanted to smoke with them. We declined, saying we were leaving early. Throughout the entire conversation, neither Bill nor I looked at each other before responding to anything I said. Before finally leaving, one of them said, "You'll be safe here. You never know who might walk in, you know?" They laughed as they left. We packed up earlier than expected. But it still surprises me because we had a dog with us. I'm a 21-year-old man who recently moved into his own house and still isn't 100% familiar with his neighborhood. The lot is rectangular in shape, lying long side down, and my house is in the right corner. Sorry if that's not clear, but that's the best way to describe it. So one night, around 12:30, I was home alone when I decided to play guitar and have a smoke before bed. I grabbed a cigarette and headed out the door. After about 3 minutes of smoking, I noticed a faint noise, like an old metal thing was creaking and needed lubrication. But the sound was rhythmic, meaning it repeated every 2-3 seconds. After it went on for about 10 seconds, I noticed I could hear tires squealing on the road. Then, out of nowhere, I saw a man about 40 years old on a bicycle, with a very stiff, harsh, and high-pitched voice. I was standing in my driveway, and he passed me and kept going, but his head slowly turned to the left, and he covered my eyes. I'm not kidding when I say this guy looks like Hannibal the teacher in the movie. But that's not what makes my heart sink. I looked him in the eye, and as he crossed my path, he suddenly gave me the ugliest, widest, most hideous, toothy smile I'd ever seen in my life and kept looking at me. It was no ordinary smile. I'm talking about the grin up to his ears when the Grinch steals Christmas. After about 15 seconds, he continues pedaling and disappears from sight. I can now hear the faint rumble of his bike's transmission. At this point, I wonder if he will ride my rectangular block, and I quickly overtake him before he reappears. As I do so, I start to hear a metallic squeal, but then I hear something else. I hear this guy laughing like crazy, and honestly, I want to get out of there faster. As he stumbles out the door in a rush of adrenaline, he starts to round the corner where my door is visible. In the blink of an eye, I opened the door, ran in, slammed it shut, and locked it. Outside, my door was closed, and I heard a man outside yelling, "Where did you go?" I went into fight mode, ran around the house, turned off the lights, went into my bedroom and waited. For the next 30 minutes, I lay on the bed, and every 3-4 minutes, I heard the bike shake for about 30 seconds. After about 30-45 minutes, it stopped, and the man disappeared. I have since quit smoking, and I am no longer late. But every time, around 2:30 in the morning, I hear the screech of a bicycle outside my bedroom window. I don't know who he is or what he wants, but this guy scares me. I don't know where to start because it was 10 years ago, and trauma has messed up my memory, but I'll try to be accurate and careful in my story. For some context, I'm a short woman, 5 feet 5 inches tall, definitely dowdy. Bob is incredibly tall, probably the tallest person you'll ever meet. He has big ears. He can be very intimidating when he's angry, but has never hurt anyone. If you understand me correctly, this is one of the bird feeders. I grew up in a small town big enough for a Walmart, but you know everyone and everyone knows you. In high school, one of my best friends met a guy we'll call Adam. He outshone us and was generally popular. I didn't think much of him at the time. He was my friend's boyfriend. Almost everyone liked him. Seemed charismatic and smart. At the time, looking back, I could have envisioned otherwise, but youth and ignorance blinded me. Now I'm 17 years old. I graduated high school early and went to college. I'm studying in a new city 2 hours away from home, don't know anyone, and live in a college dorm. The dorm was shared, and there were a few people I knew from my hometown, but they were older than me because I was an early college student and no one I had a strong relationship with. The first day I arrive at my dorm, I see Adam, an older man on my floor. Yeah, I think to myself, I'm glad I know someone here. We talk for a bit, and I unpack my stuff. My parents and I look around the campus, hugging me tightly, saying goodbye and all. I'm excited and scared about my new independent adventure. When I get back to my dorm, there is a note hanging on my door that says, "Due to misbehavior, you have been expelled from college and must leave immediately." I open the door and find that all my belongings are gone. I run downstairs, cry, show the secretary the paper, and they help me make sense of the situation. So Adam, the receptionist, jokingly moved all my stuff, including underwear and small items, to his room. I was angry, even though I looked like I should have been scared, but I laughed and unpacked my stuff again. It was my first day, I was young, and I had to roll it up right away, but this is where the story begins. Adam never had a problem after that incident, but over the next year he would occasionally overstep his compliance with me and other people. At that point I started to think it was weird, but nothing was so obvious except the first time that I couldn't just write them off as being young and stupid. 2 years went by, and my then boyfriend, my future husband, we'll call him Bob, and we moved into a shared apartment off campus. At one point there were 7 people living in a 2-bedroom apartment. When our lease expired, we decided to move to a larger place in Sublet. We found a nice apartment across town with 4 units, 2 floors and 2 stories. The apartment has 2 bathrooms, one upstairs and one downstairs, located between the 2 bedrooms. Each bathroom has a door leading to each bedroom, and the downstairs bathroom has a 3rd door. We signed a lease in our name only and authorized subletting in our name. This means that since the lease is in our name, we are personally liable for all damages and the full amount of rent. This is where we made our first mistake. Adam and his wife had recently been evicted from their apartment. Being nice and generous people, we offered them to share the apartment with a monthly payment. They both had full-time jobs and scholarships, so I knew they could rent an apartment, and Adam was studying at ROTC and seemed to be succeeding for the most part. We also reached out to other friends and found another guy from our hometown who had rented a room but couldn't move in for 90 days, and he was fine with it at that point. When we moved into the new place, Adam and his wife offered to help, and we found that a lot of our stuff was missing or broken. We were very angry, but there was nothing we could do about it, and we didn't know exactly who had done it. When all of our stuff was moved to the new place, I moved Adam and his wife's stuff, couches, kitchen utensils, etc. I found out what they were filled with. But it's not dangerous. I guess I don't mind sharing the space and letting everyone do their own thing. I worked during the day. went to school and slept at night. Adam and his wife went to school in the morning, slept during the day, and worked as security guards at night. However, I am starting to notice more expensive electronics in the house. I rarely see Adam and his wife, but sometimes I would ask, "Hey, how much is that new projector costing?" I would ask, and Adam would reply, "It's covered by the building's insurance." And maybe I'm just kidding. His family was very wealthy, so maybe there were gifts too, right? About a month goes by and things start to get weird. Each room has its own lock, so you can lock your room with the key you have. I asked Adam and his wife to stay out of my room, reminiscing about my dorm days and coming home several times a day to clean up. At first I thought it was just my imagination, maybe Bob's, but he denied it completely. I started testing the theory that I was going to put Bob on the nightstand, Y's clothes, Z's windowsill, and leave them alone. I would go home, and X, Y, and Z would end up in completely different places. I thought I was crazy. My room was damaged, and the bathroom doorknob leading into the room was down, so it couldn't be locked from the inside. Strange, I thought to myself. Perhaps it had always been like that. So, being the handyman that I am, I picked up the fork and flipped it over. Problem solved. Maybe leave a little note on the kitchen table saying, "Hey man, I fixed the downstairs bathroom. I'm going to lock it up. Let's have a house party soon. Let me know when you're free and we'll talk about it." I was going to ask him if he'd come into my room and then set boundaries. The next day the note was gone, but there was no response. I went about my business, and when I returned, I found my room trashed. My little rodent has been carried out onto the porch. Naturally, I'm angry. I checked the door. It's still locked. I checked the bathroom door. It's still locked. But Find Adam took the bathroom door and led it to the spare room downstairs, allowing him to enter my room through the spare room. What's next, right? I leave another note on the counter, this time explaining, "Look, we need to talk. What happened is not good." They weren't home at that moment, and neither was I. He had been laid off from his job as a night watchman, and due to lack of supplies, he had immersed himself in ROTC training. Most of the time, I didn't know where they both were. I was working 40 hours a week, taking 30 tests and doing research, so I was rarely home. Bob was also working 2 jobs, riding his scooter around town and coming to my campus after class, so he was rarely home either. We later learned that Adam had been expelled from college because of his behavior. Time passed and still no communication. I knew they were still alive as things had been moved, but I never saw either of them. I stayed in that room most of the time because I thought I was going crazy. My brain was telling me I was going crazy, probably for some reason. But one day, Bob and I came home, and the bathroom door that I had entered was completely gone. It was just gone. So I had to do a complete cleanup of the kitchen and living room to clean it up, and my room was a mess again. My pets are outside again. My boyfriend's scooter is outside. Clothes are scattered. Things are missing. This was the last straw. I left a note saying it was no good and closed the back door. The next day, I got a notice that the door had been removed because we need to go upstairs to use the bathroom when we are in the room and you keep the door locked. But the door was not replaced. I called the apartment complex, explained what had happened, and asked if we could break our lease next month and move into a studio apartment. They agreed, and a plan was made. After talking to the tenants, we learned that Adam and his wife had trespassed in the apartment, and we had not been notified. So I left a note on the kitchen table again, but this time in a less cheerful tone, like, "Hey, the lease is in my name. You are here to please my favor every month." I tried to stay calm, but it was too much. "You took away my privacy in my bathroom and keep coming into my room. You have 30 days to find a new place to live. Please terminate the contract as you have repeatedly invaded my privacy and damaged the apartment property. I have tried to talk to you about this, but you have not responded. I feel we are taking a risk, so please consider this a 30-day eviction notice. At this point, I have placed my animals in a good home because I fear for their health due to the situation. To give everyone time to calm down, Bob and I have decided not to leave the apartment for 2 days. Coming home is not out of the question. There is nothing in its place. I go to my room, and Bob and I make ourselves comfortable. Tomorrow we start packing up the things we won't need at the end of the month. At 5:30 there is a knock on the door. Who's there? It's Adam. I'm about to open the door ajar to announce the evacuation. In front of my little face is a gun. From the trunk I can see Adam's calm face. I yell and slam the door, locking the deadbolt just in time. Bob is already awake and running to the bathroom door. Adam slams his whole body against the door and screams, "I'm going to kill you!" This takes about 15 minutes. Honestly, I was surprised that the door went up. All of a sudden, he's completely calm, very quiet. I listen in to see if I can hear what's going on outside. With success, I run across the room, grab my trusty old Nokia cell phone, call 911, and explain the situation. The operator informs me that the patrol car is left. That's odd, I think. But Bob and I hide in the closet and wait. A few minutes later, there is a knock on the door. I try to get out, but the force of Adam's anger hitting the door bends the latch and it's hard to open. So Adam is the first one through the door. When I came out of the room, he and his wife were already talking to the officer. They are all dressed nicely and look calm. I'm in my pajamas, covered in sweat, tears streaming down my face. Bob is frustrated too. They explain to the police officers how they came to talk to us about the 30-day unfair eviction when we became enraged and started threatening them with violence. I try to explain my version of events. A second officer comes in and takes them aside to talk. I hear him go on to explain that while he was a respected soldier or ROTC police officer, he was just a security guard, and his wife, who miraculously became pregnant, was scared and worried for her life when I started making death threats about the health of the baby. I also learned many life lessons at that point. Call the police first. Make sure you know the optics. Know the signs of a psychopath. Most importantly, don't have roommates. I tried to explain the situation to the officer, told him about the gun, showed him the gun, but I, young, stupid, and scared, had no pictures of the mess I had made in my room, no pictures of the door they had taken away, no pictures, any other strange things. I asked the officer how they got the property, that technically it wasn't a rental, that I suspected theft, etc., said, etc., and adrenaline. Adam calmly handed a copy of the agreement and eviction notice to the officer, who thanked Adam for his service. At that moment, I realized I was done too. Police officer Bob and I informed Adam and his wife that we had to give Adam and his wife 30 full days to talk to them and not have any contact with them for 30 days, or Adam would call back and Bob and I would be there, arrested to continue on. For the rest of the month, Bob and I stayed in our room, only going out to work. Every time we tried to go to the kitchen or the living room, Adam would show up and tell us to go back to the living room, or he would call the police. If we had the money, I would definitely get a hotel room, but with rent and college tuition, we are almost broke. For 30 days, he and his wife kept us in our rooms. Finally, before the deadline, I handed him a note asking him to leave the keys, and I would return them to the office. "How are you?" "He's calling the police. This time I ran the optics." I put on my most innocent clothes and try to explain that I can't leave the room for 30 days. I'm afraid of this guy with a gun, and I don't want to mess up his request. Last time, he left me a note asking me not to contact him. Plus, I just got a letter from the apartment building. The officer takes the keys and hands them to me. They finally move in, and the last time I checked the apartment, I found that she had filled the upstairs toilet with water and put a hairdryer in the sink to turn it on while the door was drying. Just kidding, of course, but they had wired the switch GRE, and countless toys, if you know what I mean, scattered throughout the house. Bob and I moved into our own studio, but for years after that, wherever we went, we saw Adam wherever we went. The gaslighting was so strong that it took us a long time to realize we weren't completely crazy. On the moon, I hid. I dreamed about how it happened. He shoots me in the face, I'm somewhere, and he shows up. That sight made me sick, and I threw up a few times. After college, Bob and I came home. We had lived our lives and the event was long gone. Then one day I buy the newspaper, and the front page says, "Local hero Adam holds parade in his honor," and tells how he hurt his leg in the service. Yes, it really was a parade. I did a little research and found out that he went into the army after college, served only 2 years and never even traveled overseas. So perhaps we can say that the world has its own karma. To this day in my hometown, he is considered a decorated disabled veteran. So, before I begin the story, I think I should give some details. Me and my 3 best friends like to go out to spooky places because we get bored of the university nightlife quickly, and any paranormal experience needs something to excite us. We are all from Malaysia, and we Malaysians believe in many supernatural things because they are rooted in our history and culture. In 1998 or 1999, there was a terrible incident in Malaysia, I don't remember exactly, when 2 apartment buildings collapsed on an uneven ground. Most of the occupants of the 2 apartments died, and the worst part is that some of them died not from the collapse of the building, but from lack of oxygen. You can Google it. The building is called Highland Tower. So we decided to go to a nearby neighborhood, as the site of the tragedy was closed, although there were no guards on duty. There's a small block outside the door and it's eerie. You could see rich land, but most of the houses were empty. But what's even stranger is that the entire block didn't fall at all. This is not unusual for Malaysia, as we have a lot of hustle and bustle here. But it seems like everyone here decided to get up and leave the neighborhood. While we were walking around, a few strange things happened. First, the dogs in the neighborhood started barking in the air. We Malaysians believe that when dogs start doing these things, they see things that we can't. So we decided to avoid places where dogs bark. It is important to note that before we do all this, we set a few rules. Again, probably Malaysia. But 1, don't use real names, use nicknames. You need to keep those stray spirits from becoming attached to you. 2, if you are feeling overwhelmed, don't turn back. This is often a big mistake because even if you look around and find nothing, you will feel the presence of spirits around you. 3, don't pay much attention to strange things. We believe that if you see, hear, or smell something strange, it's best to keep it to yourself. If you need to tell someone, show your hand or make an excuse. This is similar to the second option, as any comments can attract unwanted attention. So, while walking around the neighborhood, we heard footsteps behind us. Remembering the rules, neither of us looked back. The footsteps were strange, as if appearing randomly out of nowhere. Besides, the footsteps were getting faster and faster, so the group of our companions, the expert as we called him, led us to the exit by the shortest route because it was very uncomfortable. And this is where it all went wrong. You see, an expert is one of those guys who can see things or at least sense them to a certain extent. Since we are very religious, we don't ask him questions. We just follow him, because we all want to go through it as cleanly as possible. The expert is also my best friend, who often pushes me away when something is really wrong and dangerous. The parking lot was under this big tree, so my best friend called me over and whispered, "Dude, don't panic, but when you get to the car, stay calm and make sure everyone else is quiet before we get to a more crowded place." "Why?" "Look, there's a woman sitting in the tree above your car watching us from the start." Following his advice, I started the car normally and started joking around trying to distract the others on the way back. Both my friend and the rear camera saw this. The rear view camera showed the clear shadow of a woman sitting on the roof of the car. Again, not wanting to scare the people around us and make them even more angry, we remained silent. We went to a nearby restaurant and sat for a while. The woman, according to my friend, was still on the roof of my car and hiding. Worst case scenario, he would drive us to the university dormitory and decide to molest us. So I told the guys as we got in the car, I'm going to make a special recording of praying out loud on a tape recorder and read the prayers myself. I'm not a very religious person, but I believe in God and His protection. If the plan doesn't work, we will drive or sit in McDonald's until 5 in the morning, because that is a sacred time for my religion, and there will be no woman. We finally got in the car, and I immediately started praying. This time my friend drove the car because I wanted to fully concentrate on praying. When I started, the car suddenly became very heavy, as if there was an extra passenger that shouldn't have been there. I continued to write during the trip and, to my shame, fell asleep halfway through. When we woke up, it was 2 in the morning and we made it to the hostel. According to my friend, the prayer worked, but it took a long time because the woman only let us go when we entered the campus. I asked him if he had seen anything strange. He told me all 3 of us had actually fallen asleep, and he heard someone yelling and screaming, but very angry. He also saw several times that the prayer was interrupted, the voice going up and down as if someone was deliberately trying to disturb it. Thankfully, the woman left, and we haven't been in the neighborhood again since. At some point, I got tired of following us. I think there is some strange life living in the woods near my house. I live in rural Mississippi. I won't say exactly where for privacy reasons, but the area is surrounded by a large forest with many deer stands and thick foliage. I've been seeing something strange there since I was 13 years old, but before I get to the point, I want to explain a little bit. My family has lived in this house since my grandparents moved there to raise their family. My father and his siblings grew up there. Then my father and mother moved to the house next door, and my brother moved to the house on the next street. After that, I lived there for the next 18 years until I went to college and moved to a neighboring town. The site itself is several acres of dense forest, rolling hills and steep slopes. Several trails lead to deer stands and hunting camps. Some roads also lead to hunting camps owned by other people living in the area. So, when I was 13 years old, I was walking down one of these roads when I heard a tree branch break 2 yards down the road and something fall to the ground with a loud rumble. I looked back in time and saw a humanoid running into the woods on all 4. He was naked, and his skin was white. I could only see him for a few seconds before he disappeared. I didn't see him for more than a few weeks, until he came out of the woods onto the road behind my grandparents' house. It was raining, and I was running home when I heard something moving in the shed in my grandparents' yard. I thought it was weird, considering barns are full of clutter and old stuff, so no one should be in there. But I looked inside and saw what I saw. Then I saw up close what I called the Pink Man. He was completely hairless and buried in a pile of garbage with his back to me. He was very thin, with a human body, ribs and strangely long legs. Looking over its shoulder, it looked at me, and I saw that it had deep black eye sockets, from which wide-open eyes stared at me. It had no lips, only teeth, and its mouth was horribly stretched out. It didn't even have a nose and was screaming at me. Then I ran straight home. I told my father what had happened, but when he went to check the barn with a shotgun in his hand, he found it completely empty. The following incident is not mine, but I learned of it by accident. I was participating in summer employment programs this summer. While waiting for orientation to begin, I chatted with one of the participants. We were both interested in Native American folklore and urban legends, and he asked me if I had ever heard of rake. Since the rake was the closest thing I had seen in years, I told him my story. When I complained when I told him about it, he was shocked. He had had a similar experience, and the details shocked me. It happened to my experience one year in 2014. It was deer season, and he sat in his stall until sunrise. While he was waiting, he heard something about 15 feet in the air from the side of the stall. He looked over and saw a skeletal face looking out the window. Something was clinging to the counter. The thing he was afraid of fell to the ground. He heard it hit the ground and saw it run off into the woods. He described it as a game of Wendigo, and before dawn, I told a college friend who introduced me to the game. I asked her if she could take me to it, but she said she wouldn't go there because, well, she was too scared. I asked him what neighborhood he was in to drive by and see if I could find anything. He said he could, which surprised me a lot. I can't give the exact address for privacy reasons, but he said, "You know, the intersection of this road and that road, it's just down the road from there. And my house was at the intersection of those 2 roads, so Everything he saw was close to what I saw. I didn't get any more information from him, but I suspect it was at one of the deer stands near my house. It definitely made me take the matter seriously. I consider myself an avid paranormal investigator and have spent the previous weeks searching the entire area. Every now and then, I hear something very large moving in the nearby woods, either overgrown with trees or on the opposite side of the hill I'm walking over, but somehow always out of sight. It also walks in sync with me, and when I stop, I hear it take a few steps before it stops, and only when it starts walking again do I keep moving. A similar incident happened about a week ago when I was walking past a small spring on the side of the road and heard someone walking behind me. There was a steep hill to my right. I walked around it and went in the opposite direction. Still over the hill, I heard and looked, and I could have sworn I saw a humanoid hiding at the top of the hill. The hill was too high for me to climb up and check it out, so I gave it a chance. I'm not 100% sure I saw anything in this case, so it was just a guess. But I do know that I didn't hear any footsteps behind me afterward, which was very strange. But if possible, I did a full review yesterday. I settled in a hollow near the deer stand, which was about 200 yards from where my friend first saw her, and even shorter than where I first saw her. I looked back to where I had seen the man and saw something interesting. There are a lot of hills and rain, where rainwater washes away the mud between the hills. This area is very dangerous. There was a slope on the side of the road where I met him, and I saw a set of sticks leaning against a tree in a ditch. I went down into the hole to examine things more closely and saw that the sticks were gathered almost on top of the tree, but curved like a bowl. Something seemed to have been woven out of the branches, a nest large enough to accommodate a person. Large branches, sometimes 3 inches thick, were used to reinforce the structure. I don't know of any native animal that could build something like this, and I don't think it was natural. But if it is the work of the Pink Man, I don't think he has used it lately. But I soon realized that it was incredibly hard to see anything in that darkness, and I couldn't see much outside of my tent, but I know it was 2 to 3 feet long. You may be wondering why I didn't use a flashlight. I'll answer that it was the only flashlight in my cell phone. It wouldn't have had the strength to rest under a tree. Plus, I was afraid of offending him and causing an attack. To be honest, he never tried to attack me during those moments when he followed me through the woods. He seemed to watch with interest. I watched the figure for several minutes, but it didn't move an inch. Nothing happened for about half an hour, and I thought it must be a bush, which looked strange in the total darkness. I was tired too. What animal couldn't walk for that long, right? I soon fell asleep and woke up at 8 in the morning. As I packed up my things, I looked at the 2 trees where the animal should have been. There was absolutely nothing there. Not a bush, not a branch. The place where I saw something was completely barren. It made me wonder if there really was something going on. I don't know. I don't know if it really means something. I don't know if something happened or if it's an optical illusion or something else, but that's what I felt. That's my story. Like I said, I consider myself a paranormal enthusiast. I'm posting this here because I'd love to hear your thoughts on where to go next in this investigation, as well as any information you have that might help. But I will say this. Whatever I've seen, it looks a lot like Rook. In fact, it's the only thing I can match. But it's very difficult to find reliable information on the subject, so I decided to reach out here. I will continue to search the area and keep an eye on it, and will be sure to let you know if anything turns up. Please share any questions, theories, or even hunting tips. Anything you think might help, because I'd love to know what this thing is. So, I think there is something sinister living in my parents' old farmhouse. My parents bought the place in the early 2000s, and I knew there was something more to this place from the moment I stepped foot in it. I spent summers here as a kid and experienced many of the same things. I haven't been here in 6 or 7 years, but several family members recently passed away, all of whom lived a few hours away from this farm. There are a couple old barns, a house and summer kitchen that are now used as small summer homes. There is a woods to the west of the house. This is the door or entrance to the woods, and this is where my first experience was. One weekend, my aunt, uncle, and 2 cousins came to visit us. I was very young, probably about 8 years old. My in-laws were 2 years younger than me, and we went to see the woods. We got far enough away that we couldn't see the house or hear our parents talking anymore, and we started playing sledding. My cousin Megan yelled out that she found something, so my other cousin and I went to see what it was. It was a dress, the whole outfit: denim shorts, a t-shirt, socks, and a pair of underwear. But there were no shoes, at least we didn't see any. And I, being young, thought, that's weird. But honestly, I didn't pay any attention to it. We ran some more, and I hid behind a tree because we were playing hide and seek. I bend down and look at the ground, and I see hair, like a human tail. It was all connected. At that moment, even my little brain thought, what's next? I told my family that we should probably go back at this point. We walked back. All 3 of us stopped after a few steps and looked at each other when we heard footsteps somewhere in the woods, but it was hard to tell where they were coming from. At this point, we got really scared and ran to our parents near the farm. I found the tail to my father and told him that it looked like human hair, but he was adamant that it was not human hair, but the tail left by the death of a horse. Him. I was 8 years old. I readily agreed and soon forgot. I also remembered to mention the clothes we had seen. A few days later, we returned home about 8 o'clock, and I completely forgot about the incident until I returned the following summer. When I returned, I went into the woods and looked for all the hairs I had seen the year before, but I couldn't find it anywhere. That same summer, things started happening at home. So I always wonder if what is written in these words ever reached the farm.